Welcome back to the Skids Giggles podcast. I am Pascal, chief instigator of the show and your host. I'm joined by my co-host and our resident engineer, the yin to my yang, the Miami to my vice, Bryson. How's it going today, buddy?
Hey, Pascal. I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good, very good. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Today, we have one for the old guys, one for the retro kings, and one for the lovers of all things vintage, as we are joined by the man behind the new tire for old mountain bikes, Terrance Malone. Terrance, welcome to the Skids and Giggles podcast. How's it going today?
Thanks very much. I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, wow, cool. Let's, before we get to our conversation, let's briefly do our spiel with the social and where you guys can find more information about the Skids and Giggles podcast. We are currently most active on Instagram, where you can skid right into our DMs and follow along at Skids and Giggles. And you can find our website with all the relevant links and info under the URL skidsandgiggles.com. Also, if you guys like what we're doing and want to know what's up, just give us a follow on Spotify, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to great podcasts. Finally, sharing episodes you enjoy on your socials or a heartfelt 5-star rating on your favorite platform goes a long way in helping us reach more people like you. Right on. Let's get back to Terrance. We started asking our guests a while back to lay out what kind of mountain bikers they are, just to set the stage a bit before we get into the main topics of the conversation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into mountain bikes, and what your riding looks like today?
Sure. I born and grew up in Vermont in the United States. Kind of the small neighbor to New York on the other side, as maybe Switzerland is to Germany, or maybe Liechtenstein is to Switzerland. In any case, I spent 3 years living in Germany between ages of 10 and 12, and that's really when the bike bug bit me. I was away from my friends. I was a little bit more by myself than I normally would be. I brought a couple of Stingray type proto BMX bikes with me. And while I was there, I took them apart and put them together many times, reconfigured, found new parts. When my father went back to the United States for business trips, I begged him to go to bike shops and bring me back parts that were hard to find. And it's really where I was convinced of the worth of a great tire. Around the neighborhood, we had a big group of kids, and it was a neighborhood that was in construction. So there were plenty of dirt lots where we built jumps and such. So there was a big posse of BMX kids there. And one of them came up to me after my father had brought me back some nice Cycle Pro snake belly tires to put on my jalopy Stingray pseudo BMX bike. He came up to me and said, "Wow, those are really nice tires." And I said, "Thanks, I like the wheels too." And he corrected me and said, "No, just the tires." So the tires gave me a little bit of credibility, but not as much as I would have liked. So I can remember on the way back from Germany to move back to Vermont after the 3 years were up, I was on a train and I was sitting there making specification sheets for bicycles that didn't exist, making BMX bikes. If I take these parts and I put them together with these parts, and this would be the perfect bike. Well, it took a little while, but eventually after university and a couple of years of bike bumming, trying to get a job in the bike business with an engineering degree, I finally got my foot in the door in the late 90s in Southern California with Diamondback bicycles. I started as an inside salesperson because I needed to get my foot in the door. Then I volunteered for everything possible inside that had anything to do with product development, hoping for a chance to transfer over. And then after a year and a lot of interesting extracurricular adventures, I did get a chance to become a junior product manager there. And that started the better part of more than 20 years of bicycle product development. So I rode BMX bikes. In roughly 87, 88, I transitioned over to mountain bikes. And then a few years after that, I added road bikes to the equation, but the passion has always been there for mountain bikes. So yeah, in 2000, at the end of 2008, my job in the United States as the head of product development for a bicycle company that was about to go out of business was going away fast, and an ex-boss invited me to come work with him in Switzerland. So I moved to Grenken, Switzerland, and started working for BMC. And 1 year later, when he decided that Swiss life was not for him and invited me to come follow him back to California, I said, nope, I've got some unfinished business here to do. I'm not ready to go anywhere. So that was 11 years ago, and here I am, still here.
Oh, nice. I mean, Grenchen is I wouldn't say, it's close to being a hotbed of the Swiss cycling industry, with a lot of the brands that are in a, let's say in a 50-kilometer radius around Grenchen. There's quite a few of the brands that are developing around there. Of course, BMC has like their main facility there. There's the Swiss Velodrome, of course, that they have built. But there's also other brands that are in the region and are developing. So what has your time been in Switzerland since then?
Yeah, well, I moved to Switzerland to work for BMC and kind of to lead the product development process. My job title was project manager. But at BMC in those days, the management structures tended to change every 18 months, whether you liked it or not. There was kind of a rotating door of CEOs. And eventually I got on the wrong side of the rotating door and left out of the group. So I took the opportunity to broaden my horizons and ended up working for Stromer, their sister bike company at the time, working on fast electric commuter bikes. And that's kind of what drew me back to vintage bikes again. As I was looking at working for Stromer, I knew that I was professionally capable of doing the job, but I didn't know if I would find the passion that I needed to really give my best and do a good job and remain committed. And so as I was starting to go there, I started to look at the bikes that were available and about the history of brands and different bicycles that I only ever saw in magazines in North America when I was growing up. So in order to find a balance between what drew me into cycling and made me a lifer within the cycling business and this kind of brave new world of electronics and government regulations that define the electric bike business, I really took a deep dive into vintage bikes at that time.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess certainly the commuting space, that's where the industry has been going for the last 5 to 10 years, and I think we are increasingly seeing it branch out into the other, in air quotes, disciplines. Obviously mountain bikes. We've talked a lot about e-mountain bikes. Of course, it's now also popping up on the road, both in a more, let's say, recreational sense, but of course there's always been the performance side. There's always been the accusations of abusing the motors in competition. So it's been around for a bit longer, but yeah, I mean, it's not saying a necessary evil, but I mean, it's another shade on the spectrum of bicycles, and it's I think we can always take something positive out of it, and let other parts inspire by the development of e-bikes. I think there's I mean, personally don't ride an e-bike, but there's positive stuff for me coming out of e-bikes. So like brake pads and rotors and stuff like that. But to come back to to your journey, and of course now we're talking about Terra One and your journey with vintage bicycles. So what was the real kind of the point where you decided, well, there's a real gap in the market. I need to make vintage looking tires.
Well, happened kind of in two ways. One gave me the trust that it could happen, and the right partner. And the other one was a little bit of a personal thing, and the two of them together set things in motion in 2018 or 2019. While I was at Stromer's bikes since the beginning of the company had always been with 26-inch wheels. And they fought the good fight for 26 for quite a few years while the entire industry was transitioning over to 27.5 and 29. So while I was there, I was very strongly involved in making the first Stromers with big wheels. And the tires that were used on the Stromers with 26-inch wheels, for the most part, were underperforming and underwhelming and not really doing the job. And so we knew that while the wheel size itself, the change in wheel size would be the big story when, say, the ST5 and the ST3 were introduced a few years ago, that the biggest opportunity for better performance for the riders would be to make tires that were really specifically designed for that type of riding, that were not an urban bike tire that was beefed up to be an e-bike tire, something that was designed for the ground up to be an e-bike tire. So I had some previous experience in developing tires way back to 1998, when I designed a tire when I was working at Diamondback, along with Chengshin Tire, the parent company of Maxxis. So I had some experience in that, and I very quickly got a lot more experience. I worked with two companies to develop tires at Stromer. One of them, and they were very opposite in the way they approach the market. One of them was Pirelli, who at that time was very new back into the bike market after a long time. And at the time, they had only developed road bike tires. They hadn't done mountain bike tires yet. They hadn't done any urban bike tires yet. So this project of making a tire specifically for Stromer was the first development project that they had outside of road bikes. And so that was very much kind of a top-down approach to tire design, where we had a list of specification requirements, very detailed, that we passed along to them, where they took it very seriously from the corporate level, and then passed that down to their group of engineers and product managers, and especially the testing team. And so it culminated in a process where they eventually built, once they'd opened the molds and we'd agreed on the tread design, they built 14 generations, 14 revisions of different constructions of the tire within the mold. And their test team whittled it down to the best two, and then they invited us to come down to their test track near the Milan airport and try the two of them and pick the one that we felt was the best. So a very unique development process and a very, let's say, corporate way of doing things. Here's our fancy test track. Here you can use the cobblestones, the speed track, the wet weather track. We have it all set up for you. I mean, there was an ambulance on hand just in case things got out of hand, which they did. Yeah, and so it was amazing that we tried the tires back to back with the tires that we had been specifying, basically a larger wheeled version of the tire that we had used in 26 inch. And yeah, especially on the wet weather track, it was absolutely night and day. Going through very wet turns at anything above about 10 or 15 kilometers an hour, no confidence in the tire's performance. And then switching to the tire that we had helped develop, it was incredibly confidence inspiring. I mean, the Stromers are electronically limited to 45 kilometers an hour. You could go through every corner on that as long as you use proper cornering technique at full speed and not feel any doubt in the performance of the tires. It was absolutely night and day. Unfortunately, then I decided, why don't I try riding like a typical Stromer customer might ride as opposed to somebody who belongs on a test track. So I tried to make a much more square corner than the outside, inside, outside racing line. And I got into the marbles that the race cars and the motorcycles had left on the inside of the corner. And experienced a sudden loss of traction. And then all of a sudden I found out what the ambulance was there for. So,
there you go.
So yeah, that was one development project that got me psyched about making tires again. The other one was with kind of a completely opposite way of bottom-up development, where we were working from a very technical side down with the factory people, with the people that are making the drawings. This was with V-Tire, in Thailand, who is the manufacturer of the Terra One tires. And so also a very rewarding development process, but a very different type of development, not as corporate, much more personal, a more friendly relationship with the key people involved, much more we can do it. You know, you ask for it, we can do it mentality as opposed to the more corporate style. So with them, we developed. We knew that we couldn't use the very expensive Pirelli tire on the entry level bikes. So we developed an entry-level tire for the entry-level bikes that we tried to make it give as much of the performance of the very expensive European-made tire as we could. And the other project that we had was to make the first 27.5-inch winter-specific tire that was homologated to the ECE R75 standard for mopeds, which is required on Speed Pedelecs 45 kilometer an hour e-bikes. So, I was very much involved in those two developments as well. So I had come off these two tire development projects. I had a garage full of vintage mountain bikes. My main source for new tires for the old bikes had gone away. Unfortunately, Jeff Archer from First Flight Mountain Bikes in North Carolina had passed away in a traffic accident, and he had, along with Panaracer and Ritchie, had arranged to have them make new tires with old designs. But once he had gone, there was nobody there that had the passion and could pick up the ball and run with it, and so I was no longer able to buy a case of tires from him. And I'd given away so many of the case of tires that I'd bought from him in the first place that I really needed some tires. In July of 2019, I incorporated Terra One GmbH, Limited Liability Corporation. And very soon after that, I had already been testing V-Tire's standard models to see what constructions I like, what I liked and what I didn't. And then it was off to the races, creating the first tire design, then working through it to potentially make it more manufacturable, then paying for the molds, testing prototypes, placing orders, waiting, and then getting the first Terra One Rider T1 tires. So that's a little bit more than a year ago when they first went on sale. So it's been about 15 months since the first ones were sold.
I remember seeing these tires on Instagram, quite a while ago. And I thought to myself, wait a second, people are making 26-inch tires? And at the time, I've always had vintage bikes. I've always had 26-inch vintage bikes, particularly steel. I'm a very big fan of steel frames. And I was thinking, okay, actually, these tires would look good on my bike. But I held off because I'd already bought a new set. So I was thinking, okay, maybe down the road, whatever. And also, I'm so engulfed in this scene of mountain bikes, so I'm also already worrying about 27-inch and 29-inch for the various mountain bikes that I have. So, kind of went on the back burner. But I guess the feed always kept reminding me of the Terra One, and eventually, it kind of dawned on me when we were just having regular conversation with Pascal, and I thought, hang on a second, Terra One is in Switzerland. I need to contact them. So just a little background for our listeners. Straight off your product page on your website, it says, the Rider T1 is a new premium tire designed to achieve optimized fit, superior function, and period-appropriate style on vintage, retro, classic, cult, and old-school mountain bikes. The size is 26 by 2.125, which is metric 54,559. And the specifications are beige skin walls without printed logos, folding beads, 120 TPI casing, that's thread per inch, and black dual compound tread rubber. Now, since we first got in touch, I got my hands on a pair of these. I've mounted them up, and they're beautiful, to say the least. Now, first of all, I want to thank you for doing some 26-inch tires. They're super cool. I haven't managed to go for a ride yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. What's your inspiration for the tread design?
Well, it has a lot to do, one, with the type of bikes that I had in my garage that needed the proper tires, and also the type of riding that I most often do here in Switzerland. I'm very thankful that as an American, being exposed to living in Switzerland has convinced me that the most important cycling accessory is not a car, that you are totally capable of making a ride out your front door that is fulfilling and adventurous. I'm still discovering new trails around the area where I live all the time. At the time that I designed the Rider T1, I had no idea whether there would be a second tire, whether this would be successful, whether it would support itself. And so I figured if I was only ever going to design one tire under my own brand, I better make it one that I like a lot and that I would use a lot. And so what was missing in the marketplace was a tire that looked like the tires that were available from the beginning of mountain biking right up until about 1987. And these are tires that aren't race tires, they're not mud tires, they're not free ride tires, they're not downhill tires. At that point, they're mountain bike tires, and the only type of mountain bike tire was a mountain bike tire that needed to do everything pretty well. So that's the type of tire that I wanted to design. What was missing in the marketplace as far as 26-inch tires? Thankfully, we have quite a few 26-inch tires that are still being made. Panaracer alone makes quite a few. One the Smoke and Dart under their own name are still in current production. And they also make tires for a couple of other smaller brands, Simworks, Ultra Dynamico, and some others. So we're fortunate that there are a bunch of tires that kind of look correct on bikes from the 1990s. But when you put a tire that has front and rear specific tread patterns, that has a really square profile where the edge knobs are much taller than the center knobs, where they have printed graphics on the side that are large and bright colors that make the tire pop in an advertisement, in a magazine advertisement, or if it's on the retail floor of a bike shop. The tires from the early to mid 80s never had any of this. They had very clean sidewalls, and if there was a printed patch on the tire, it was very discreet and small. They had a round profile that meant that you could ride it on hard surfaces and still have confidence, as well as soft surfaces. They had large tread blocks with relatively simple shapes that either came from motocross or BMX tires. Basically, the first purpose-built mountain bike tires were just 26-inch versions of BMX tires. So that's what I set out to build. Something that would work well in all conditions, but not be extraordinarily good at any one of them, and then have a weakness in another area, and also something that looked proper and fit proper on old mountain bikes.
Yeah, I would say they definitely fit and look proper. Like the size is bang on. It fits right into my cantilever brakes and between the stays on the back end, so I've no problems there. And actually, they give a really nice profile too. So enough glamorizing about them. They're really cool. Yeah. So you said you have a bunch of early mountain bikes, 26-inch wheels. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what kind of bikes you have and like maybe how you got them.
Wow, where do I start? How long is this podcast again?
We can go over let's go over the two with the best story maybe.
So I guess I think as we started to discuss in a different chat, what gets me excited about diving into vintage mountain bikes here in Switzerland is not necessarily the bikes that I grew up with and the ones that I had back in the United States. But the ones that I only saw in magazines, if there was a World Cup and there was an article about a race or the World Championships, you'd see a rider, for instance, in the pink and yellow Lycra of the Chilo team, riding a bike that you'd never seen before and that looked like it came from outer space. Chilo is a Swiss company, the company that developed the suspension for their first full suspension bikes for the race team, is in Lamboing, Switzerland, which is no more than 20 kilometers from where I live. So all of a sudden I found myself in a perfect position to go and see firsthand and to meet people and to really get into the history of the bikes that were designed and built here in Switzerland. So that's the most of my collection that I have here. It's not a bunch of American bikes. I think the Swiss collectors are much more enamored of American bikes because that's what was exotic to them. For me, exotic was a Chilo with ATZ suspension. So that's a lot of what you'll find in my garage is bikes from Europe and Switzerland in particular. My favorite brand, the one that if I grew up in Switzerland instead of at Vermont and had a deep pocketbook or worked two jobs and spent more money on bikes than anything else, would have been Ferraroli, Skids Ferraroli from La Chaux de Fonds in the Jura Mountains. They built in steel. They came from a road bike's side, but they really rode the wave of the mountain bike boom in the late 80s. In 1987, the first year where they printed a catalog, they had as many mountain bike models as Specialized or Cannondale in that year. And 1987 was also the first year of unofficial mountain bike world championships. And in the European World Championship, Ned Overend was first on a Schwinn, Joe Murray second on a Fisher, and the third place was a French rider on a Ferraroli. And I really feel bad about not remembering his name. Jacques Devy, I think. So at the time, a little Swiss brand that was best known for made-to-measure, hand-built, silver-brazed road bikes was among the top mountain bike companies in the world. And so I really kind of fell in love with the feeling of the made-to-measure, the special aspect of those bikes, especially when I was first diving into the vintage mountain bikes. I knew that even if I ended up with one of the later bikes that was made on a Japanese frame that had been exported to Switzerland and then painted and assembled here, that even that was a very high quality bike. So I have quite a few of those, ranging from road bikes, track bikes. My kids both have bikes that were made in Le Chaux de Fonds, and then a number of different mountain bikes from 1984 to 1997. So those are the ones that I'm most enamored of. I have a blog called Fascination Ferraroli, where I basically archive as much information as I can that I find as when I have time to help other people understand, appreciate those bikes. I like to say that the Ferraroli bikes are underappreciated and fully depreciated, which makes it very nice to go collect them. If you have to go find a Ritchie or a Yeti in Switzerland that cost as much as one of those bikes, you're going to pay a very large premium, but you can have quite a few hand-built Ferraroli bikes for a relatively low cost if you know what you're looking for. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these bikes you just mentioned, right? So especially the Chilo, the neon yellow and pink one. There was obviously the top end model back in the day, but they obviously used the same paint job for a number of their models. And later on in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of people would just completely neglect those bikes and wouldn't even know the history or the heritage of those bikes, and would use them as pub bikes or train station bikes or whatever. And but yeah, I mean, there's still quite a few kicking about, and I think we can always with a bit of luck you can always find one.
Definitely, you've been contributing to the vintage retro and how should I say it? Vintage, retro, and classic mountain bike scene on more than one occasion, or what I'm trying to say here, in more than one way. You also let me know about a cool stash spot that we have local here in Bern, and one of the things I like to do when I visit a city or I'm traveling, is I like to go into different bike shops and see what they have. And I've always been into like digging through the old old parts bins and stuff. And I always or I go to like the secondhand shops, and it's always been kind of a little bit of a thing for me when they let me like go into the old parts bins and I get to like put together my own derailleur or something. So I've done that a couple times on my old mountain bikes that I used to ride. But you mentioned one of the great things for you is that you get to meet people also. So maybe you want to say something a little bit about the vintage or retro mountain bike community in Switzerland, or where else you've encountered it.
Sure. Yeah, it's amazing the camaraderie that can be built even just through the internet between like-minded individuals. And, eventually you're going to have people with passionate opinions that clash with each other. But in the end, especially if you can get together with people, go on a ride, share a meal or a beverage together, it really can go a super long way in making friendships that last a long time. And I'm thankful that, as an American expat living in Switzerland, that I have made quite a few Swiss friends through the hobby. But also all over the place. When my family goes on vacation, or when my family went on vacation a year or two ago, it's amazing to visit friends that I've made through the internet along the way, bring them some parts or bikes, pick something up from them, introduce my family to their family, and almost without exception, my wife will say, these are really great people. Whether or not they were into cycling or not, we'd still want to be friends with them. So with Germany, where I've met a bunch of my colleagues. With France, where I went to an event called Le Rondold School, and met a bunch of the French community. In the UK, I've been there as well, and this was all before the tires existed. Met a bunch of people that I already considered friends, but really now are very true friends. It's amazing. Community is such a big thing, and for me, it's very important for me to give back to the community. Bryson, like you said, if you are lucky enough to find a stash, an old shop that's got old stock of the old parts and think of them as just junk that's worthless, if you find a derailleur or a handlebar or a stem that's new but 30 years old and has been sitting in a basement, it still has the same performance that it did back then. It might not have the performance of a modern part, but at least it hasn't deteriorated at all. Unfortunately, tires are the one thing where if you find a set of tires that's been sitting in a basement for 30 years, you have no guarantee at all that there's any performance, safety at all in them. And so this was a big inspiration for me to make tires in the first place, because even if you can find old ones, they're good for a show, but they may not be very good to go.
Exactly. I guess that's the limitation of the material. But the 80s and then certainly the 90s, they're very famous for some pretty outrageous developments in mountain bikes. One of them is, of course, multicolored tires. We had as you may know, we had Robin from Onza on a couple of shows back, and they are actually pretty successful. And I find it very hard to believe that a white tire can be successful. But, it's all for show, apparently. Is there any plans to also bring, and I can remember myself having multicolored tires, by the way, and I have photographic evidence of that. Is there any plans to bring multicolored tires back for Terra One?
Yes. It's back when I had a business plan that was untouched by pandemics and supply chain issues and logistics challenges. My intention was that in between opening new molds for new models, then I would offer a second color version of the previous tire to fill the product gap in between, to keep the excitement level high. And so for the Rider T1, the first tire, which has the beige sidewalls and black tread, and is intended to evoke the 1980s, the alternate color is not very exciting. It's just an all black tire. The very earliest mountain bikes, say in the late 70s, early 80s, predate the use of skin wall look in clincher tires. So they had tires like Carlisle knobbies and Uniroyal knobbies, the ones from the balloon tire cruisers, the Schwinn balloon tire cruisers, even some that were made in the United States. It was pretty obvious that with a 1980s tire, before all the colored insanity happened in the 1990s, that one should be pretty tame as far as the alternate colorway. So there are a few Blackwall prototypes around, and the production of those Blackwall tires should happen very soon. It got delayed a couple of times to prioritize more skinwall tires. But then with the second tire design, which is currently in prototype format in the original color of beige and black, there we're looking at a tire that's inspired by the late 80s and early 90s era, and then we're encroaching into the crazy colors time frame. And so the intention there is I don't want to do crazy colors just to do crazy colors. One of the things that's important to me with the Terra One tires is that they look as if they could have come from the period in which they evoke, but they bring modern technology to give you performance that you couldn't have expected from what was available at the time. I think a lot of the light colored tires from the early to mid 90s were soft compound and perhaps worked a little bit better in wet conditions just because they left the carbon black out to get a colored tire. They were soft not by intention, they were just soft because when you color a tire, you take the carbon black, which reinforces the rubber out of it, and then the tread compound is softer, and so the grays and the ivory colored, cream colored tires, and even the Onza Porcupine White that you mentioned, softness was an effect, but not the cause. And so my intention with the alternate colorway of the T2 tire will be to use a modern tread compound that doesn't use carbon black, but does use silica to reinforce the compound. Silica came from the automotive side and then made its way into motorcycle and then into to bicycle tires. A lot of the tire companies use silica in addition to carbon black and mix them together. But in this case, I will be using a purely silica compound, and the tread color is cream ivory white. But in this case, it will be to make a tire that's specifically designed to work better in cold and wet weather conditions because of the technology, not just because of the fashion, making a softer tire that grips better in those conditions. So it should give you a little bit of the fashion of the light colored tires of the early 90s, but again, superior performance to what was available then.
Yeah, building on the mantra that you want to build or you want to create a tire for today, but make it look like a tire of yesterday. I think you hit the nail on the head there. What were some of the reactions you got from some of the ridership?
A lot of good reactions. Just a lot of thankful reactions. Thank you for, I think I heard it from you. Thank you for making 26-inch tires again. People appreciate what I've got. I've tried to make sure that it's a premium product that really addresses the needs of enthusiasts. I'm not making tires with wire beads to keep the cost down. There's dual compound tread rubber, a very high-end and supple casing, and even to the point where I polled a lot of my friends and colleagues within the community. If this is intended to be a tire for daily riding, do we want a puncture protection layer underneath the tread? Or do we want reinforcing rubber inserts in the sidewalls to help prevent against pinch flats? Modern technology that really wasn't available back then. But if you're buying this tire to ride every day and be very confident that you're not going to have problems, would really be a help. And the feedback was very, very decidedly, no, we want the highest performing tire that we can get. Keep it as light as it can be, keep it as supple as it can be, especially for bikes that don't have any suspension in the first place, where the tires are effectively the only suspension or the major suspension. So yeah, the feedback has been positive and helpful in making decisions like that. As time goes on, I intend to incorporate more of the feedback from the community into the tire design. So the first tire design, as we discussed, I built that to be the tire that worked on the bikes in my garage and on the type of riding that I do the most, not knowing if there would be a chance to do a second one. On the T2 tire that I'm testing now, this was designed basically as my attempt to give the community the tire that they wanted the most. But it was my interpretation of what they wanted. I listened to what people told me they wanted, whether it was in a direct conversation or just scanning forums and websites. But I didn't really have it be an interactive process. I just took what I heard, but it wasn't really a two-way communication. And so in the future, with a third design, I really intend to make it a much more community-driven design. Crowd-funded or crowd-sourced or crowd-designed is maybe a little bit too much of a cliche at this point, but yeah, first step I made the tire I wanted. Second step, the tire I thought that the market wanted, and third step, I really want to take a lot more input and go back and forth with people to design a tire that hopefully the community really appreciates and makes something that's new and unique and is not just my personality in the tire design.
Yeah, as a tire enthusiast myself, one of the things that really attracted me to the Terra One is that it didn't have the extra sidewall beefing, the run flat, or the extra cap to prevent any punctures and things like that. Because while those are quite recent technologies in tire development for bicycles, it's actually, in my opinion, the most pronounced or underrated or newest sort of technology is this supple tire. And from my understanding, when you have the right combination of the construction and the rubber having the suppleness, you can actually prevent the flats that you would normally get that you were trying to create or trying to prevent with using those other technologies. So yeah, thank you for trying that path out, because it definitely brought me to wanting to try that tire out, the Rider T1. Yeah, reading further into the social media that you have on your Instagram, I hear that there's a small story with your son. So, how is it that you want to create a Terra One that will also be there for your son?
Yes, I have 8-year-old twins, one boy and one girl. And if you ask the girl what she wants to be when she grows up, she will be very specific and very definitive today. Next week, she will be very specific and very definitive, but have a completely different answer. It changes from all the time. And so they're twins. They're different genders, and they definitely have different personalities. And you ask the same question to my son, and he gives the answer, I don't really know what I want to do, Dad, as long as I'm working with you. And so this is a big weight on my shoulders. If I continued on and worked with big bike companies and climbed the corporate ladder, let's say they're 8 now, in 10 years, would there really be an opportunity for my son to come work with me? Probably, maybe at the same company, but probably not working hand in hand on doing anything or making anything. And so yeah, this is kind of a the personal source of wanting to create Terra One outside of just making some bike tires, was to build a brand, to build a company that could be there, that we could work on together when he is ready to join the workforce. So yeah, there's no marketing department involved in that. That is a completely true story.
And it looks like you kind of have this, how do you say, kind of a natural or slowly progressing development of the way that you handle the tire company development. So at first I was really interested. Are you basing it on like a business model that you had, or from something that you had came up with by yourself? Because it seems like, you kind of organically, you just decided, okay, I need this tire, I'm going to make it for myself, and okay, let's see if it takes off. And then now you had this feedback, and then you came out with, or now you're developing a T2, and it's sort of like organically unfolding, would you say?
Well, yeah, I think you said it best, that it's slowly developing with the pandemic and all the challenges inherent to it. Things are developing much more slowly than I expected. But I think in a few years, in hindsight, I think it will be a blessing and not a curse. I get really excited about things like this, things that projects that I'm personally involved in, and especially if I am doing the design, the development, the marketing, every aspect of it. I'm pouring my own personality, my heart and soul into the project. It would be very easy to overreach and say, I want to get this out to as many people as possible. I want to sign up 5 distributors in each country. I want to do this. I want to do that. Thankfully, this unique set of circumstances has kind of put the brakes on it, on the what's possible, and made me focus on what's really important and growing in a very responsible way, and not going too fast, too far, too quickly, let's say. And so, yeah, originally I intended to be selling the original Rider T1 and the Blackwall Rider T1, and be selling the T2 tire by this time. And it didn't happen that way. So far, I'm lucky at this point with the production lead times in the bike business right now to be waiting for a new shipment of the original tire, which should arrive within the next 2 weeks. Then the Blackwall tire will come a little bit later than that. And then the T2, it's unlikely that the T2 will be available by the end of this year. It's probably going to be 2022 before the T2 is available, unless the friendships I've made at the factory really, really, really pay off, and they can sneak my small quantities in between the big orders. So yeah, it's I want to grow responsibly. I want Terra One to be there for my family in the long term because of the inspiration from my son. I'm fortunate in that I didn't devote all of my resources or even all of the efforts of Terra One specifically only to tires over the last year and a half. There's a balance in Terra One of making my own products under my own name and with my own designs. And also, I did quite a bit of consulting over the last 2 years as Terra One for a variety of startups, both here in Switzerland and outside of Switzerland. And because of the slowdown on the tire side, having the consulting work really helped to keep Terra One, the tires, and Terra One's family, my family, afloat during these difficult times. I didn't want to overcommit in any way that would jeopardize what Terra One could be in the future and what it should be to the vintage mountain biking community.
Okay. One question obviously comes to mind. Of course, there's a number of items from the vintage scene, or from the Wayback Machine, that have since disappeared in the mountain bikes of today. Are there any plans to bring other things from way back with Terra One? So other products like bar ends or funky bullhorn bars, or is it specifically only tires?
No. Who's to say what could be possible? Again, I'd like to be flexible enough, both personally and as a small corporation, to make what people want. But I think in the short term, what I'm really interested in is something that reminds me of topics that you've had on your podcast, is more responsible manufacturing. The Terra One tires of today would not exist without the help of V-Rubber in Thailand. I picked them because of the experience that we had together in developing tires for other companies. I picked them because they're a highly vertically integrated company. They're part of a group that owns the rubber trees in the plantation, and that rubber goes to the tire factory, becomes tires, and becomes the finished product. They can also make their own molds inside the factory. They don't have to sub that work out to a machine shop. It's because of their flexibility and because of their efficiency as a highly vertically integrated company that made it possible for them to take a small order for a completely custom tire for a niche market that the rest of the bike industry says is dead. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a Terra One. But on the other side, I feel the trends, and I feel an affinity for products that are made closer to where they're used and where I live. I have a project going with a manufacturer in France to make grips, another rubber product. So kind of a natural offshoot of tires, and another thing that doesn't age very well and wears out quickly, especially if you find old 30-year-old grips and then use them. Even if they're perfect now, they probably won't age very well. So another related product which can be made much closer to home. The tooling and the machinery you need to make a pair of grips is much more simple than a tire, where you have a fabric casing, you have a Kevlar bead, you have the tread rubber, you have many steps. It's pretty easy to make a grip. It's pretty easy to make a grip. It's not easy to make a really good one. So that's the next product that I see on the horizon for Terra One. So in development now, and don't know when it will be available. Needs to be prototyped and tested. The design is finished, and I'm waiting for something to try.
Nice. Well, I guess that's the upside of all that pandemic delay, is that there's obviously problems because everything takes so long. But on the other hand, it also gives everyone a chance to slow down a little bit and reconsider their actions and think through stuff a little bit more. Maybe one final question from my side is, yes, we're glamorizing the past and the history of the sport, and I obviously have very, very good memories of the past, but not everything was great. In fact, actually, a lot of things were not great at all. So I'm just wondering if you also take inspiration from today's mountain biking and the developments and technologies that we have today. Do you take them back to your products and your tires? I mean, yes, we've talked about having improved puncture protection and different carcasses and stuff like that, but also in terms of tire design, because of course today stuff has moved on a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's a mixed bag. There are some elements that I do want to apply, rubber technology and the construction of the tire. I think it's important to make a modern tire that can outperform what was available back then. But as Bryson said, a lot of the new technology is maybe not appropriate for the spirit of the older bikes. Gravity carcasses and, triple layer casings and all of the things that you can put on a tire maybe don't really benefit those old bikes as much as they do. We just don't ride into a rock garden at the same speed as we do on a modern full suspension bike. So you don't really need all of that. When your tire has, the tread blocks are so thick, then do we really need a puncture protection layer underneath that? Modern tires have relatively thin, low tread blocks compared to the Rider T1. So, there are some things, but I just want to be selective and make sure that in the end, the products that we make as Terra One are appropriate for those old bikes. There is a little bit of a comeback of 26-inch wheel size in the bike packing segment and adventure segment. And one thing that is a very commonly asked question on my website or on socials is the Rider T1 tubeless ready? Can it be used as a tubeless tire? And I specifically made that tire so that it wasn't tubeless ready or it wasn't tubeless compatible. I've had experiences with modern tires on vintage rims, a tubeless ready or tubeless compatible tire that because of the tighter tolerances that are necessary to make a tubeless system seal up were almost impossible to get on and off the rim. And so do I have anything against tubeless technology? Absolutely not. I think it's wonderful. I love it on modern bikes. Would I be willing to make a tubeless version of a Terra One tire eventually? Yes, if there was an appropriate rim that matched up with it. You could really make a 90s mountain bike a lot more capable if you had a tubeless rim and a tubeless tire that went with it. The less suspension you have, the more that's going to be a benefit. But maybe that's another segment that I will eventually have to get into. If you want to optimize performance on your vintage bike, you need a tubeless tire and a tubeless rim that looks and performs well on the older bikes. But it's very unlikely that we're going to see that from a major manufacturer because there's no OEM original equipment specification of 26-inch rim brake rims. There's no business out there to chase after in high quantities. So we'll see. We'll see.
Maybe Mavic has some leftover 26-inch UST rims from way back.
Actually, I have a pair.
Nice. Anyway, final one for me. What is your favorite tire today?
Other than the ones that I'm making?
Of course. Modern tire. Contemporary tire.
Road or mountain?
Yeah, well, I kind of fall in the middle. What can I say? I live here on the south face of the Jura Mountains, and the type of riding that's available out my door is basically ride the fire roads, zigzag up the hill, and then take fall line trails that go immediately down the hill. And up until very recently, when I started riding more modern bikes more often again, I didn't really like that very much. I really like on old bikes flow. And when you're at the foot of the short, steep Jura Mountains, trails with real flow are hard to come by. I treasure them and I session them because it's hard to get more than 10 or 15 minutes of flow on any given trail. And so, where was I going with that? Up until I started riding some more modern mountain bikes with bigger wheels where the bottom bracket height sits below the level of the wheel axles, I really didn't like the trail enduro bikes that existed with 26-inch wheels. I mean, it may sound ironic because I'm making 26-inch tires for old bikes, but in that transitional phase where the bike categories started to become more specialized. Oh, I said that word. Please remind me never to say that.
Get the lawyers out.
User specific, let's say. Those bikes, I didn't like the way they rode at all. I felt like I was perched way on top of it. I had you naturally with the 26-inch wheels, the bottom bracket is higher relative to the axles. And so you already have a feeling of being perched on top of the bike instead of sitting inside it with a modern bike. And then you add, 140, 150, 160 millimeters of travel. And I didn't feel comfortable on them at all. And so only with more modern bikes with big wheels have I really gotten a feel for that type of riding and really started to enjoy it. And so the tires that I've been riding most recently on mountain bikes have been Maxxis tires with a really, really grippy tread compound. You can actually see the tread wearing away during the course of a long ride. But I was on a ride the other day on a trail that I would never, ever, ever, ever take a vintage bike on. And I was very, very happy to have that super grippy rubber and the strong casing of a modern gravity or trail tire. It was quite a bit.
We've come a long way since the green Michelins and the original Porcupines and the multicolored Hutchinsons and all these kind of tires I remember from my days back in the 90s, which were obviously a bit more challenging on terrain that you just described. Well, we just heard a little bit about your riding at home, but apart from riding fire roads up and steep trails down, what does your riding look like today?
Well, it depends whether I'm riding a modern bike, e-bike for work, or a vintage bike. I find that they complement each other pretty well. One thing that I really appreciated after first working on the electric commuter bikes, fast electric commuter bikes, was how fit I got commuting on a regular basis on the e-bike. And then on the weekends, I was ready to rock because I had a really solid amount of time in the saddle. And then because of the electric assist and the controller limited top speed, then it pretty much limited the maximum effort I could do. If I was out on my normal pedal bike, I would be training too hard, and then for event time, not having anything left. So the mix of modern and vintage there can be really quite nice. Another example of it is if I'm off exploring in the mountains to the north of me, if I see a new trail headed off in a new direction, oftentimes I'm at the limit of either the time that I have to spend on the ride or my cardiovascular fitness or whether I can actually, keep climbing on an even steeper trail than I'm already on, and I just leave them to the side. I say I'll come back later and check it out when I'm feeling better or this or that, and I very rarely did until I started riding a bike where I had some assistance, and then you see something, you go, okay, let's do it. So it's really it's quite nice to have the two of them. Now I know for certain when I pass a trail and say, okay, this might be hard, but I can do it, and it's worth it to get to what's on the other side. Or no way, I can barely make it with electric assistance. So yes, for these days, my time on the vintage bikes is usually riding things that I'm very familiar with, the old favorites, and waiting to discover new ones on the modern bike. I really love exploring on the bike and discovering new trails, new places, finding new friends, making new friends, but these days, the exploring is coming more on the modern bike, and then the fun is happening. Making the most of them happens on the vintage bikes.
Okay, what is your most recent discovery in terms of the new trails that you found? That you've been most impressed with?
Oh wow! One of them was a trail. Where I pedaled up to somewhere where I'm quite familiar with, but had only ever come down one way before. So I pointed my way a little bit further from home, and then followed a trail sign, which to me didn't make much sense. That the destinations they were pointed to seemed to be switched, and I didn't understand what happened. And to me, that was like a challenge. Why doesn't this work? I need to know why this sign is pointing me in the direction that's the opposite of where I expected that it would. And thankfully I was on a bike with big travel and very grippy tires, because I should have known as I was climbing over the cow gate over the stone fence. A lot of times those gates, the metal part goes over the stone fence. So you just have to kind of skitter across the steel gate, and then you're over the thing. But in this case, this steel gate basically ended right where the fence began. So I had to get the bike over the steel gate and then get it over the stone fence. And I'm like, this is very strange. Why is this happening? Then a hiker coming the other way gave me a kind of a funny look. And I said, wow. Has she never seen a bike on this trail before? Well, perhaps not, because this trail ended up being a traverse across the side of a very steep face where it was, there were no switchbacks. This was just one long traverse where there were just a couple of S-bends to go around trees and rocks and such. And it was quite wet at that time, and so it was quite sloppy, and there was quite a bit of steering with the rear wheel as opposed to the front wheel, skids. And then in the middle of it, there was a rock slide that had taken out, any of the trees. So we went from trees and wet soil to a rock garden immediately. And and so we cleared through that, and I only went down once, and I went down to the right-hand side, which was good. because if I'd gone down to the left-hand side, I would have gone down and down and down and down. And since it was a place that had no phone reception, and my wife, I'd never been before on the bike, my wife would never think to go look for me there. So thankfully, I made it out of that one alive. And so a lot of the exploring is good to find new trails that are appropriate for the vintage bikes, but I'm glad I could check that one off the list as completely inappropriate for vintage bikes.
All right. Well, today we have a little something special for the closeout because we are getting towards the end of our time today. And Terrance, he had a great idea, and maybe you can explain a little bit what is the idea and what are we doing today?
Sure. Well, I've grown to really appreciate your podcast as a very authentic and natural podcast where the content and the direction and even the guests are very much coming from the heart of the hosts. And it reminds me very much of a podcast from Vermont, where I grew up. And they're also a two-man team, and they also have a group of 3 closing questions that they use very often. The name of the podcast is Uncommon Deeds, and it's a podcast that deals with motorsport and not cycling. So I've taken their closing questions, and I'd like to turn the tables or flip the script and ask you two, Pascal and Bryson, some of their closing questions, their quick hitter questions, so that the listeners of the Skids and Giggles podcast can get a better feeling about where you are coming from and your history beyond Kona Stinkies.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's go to Pascal first. What is the one bicycle that you've owned that you most regret not having today?
Well, we talked about it before recording, but and as I said, I literally just texted the guy that owns that bike today because I sold it to him about 20 years ago. And it's in almost pristine condition still because, he's been riding it a bit, but not quite as much. It is a 1998 Kona Hey in titanium, which was at the time was a fantastic bike. I spent a lot of time on this bike. It was a race bike for me. It was a time when I had access to great parts for not much cost, and so it's a fantastic bike. It is a super fun bike. Of course, compared to today's bikes, it's super sketchy and everything, but it's just beautiful. It was one of my first project bikes. I like a good project bike. So kind of building it up myself and customizing. We've had that topic as well, and that was like one of my very first from the ground up projects, and somehow I need to get it back. And hopefully I will, because he's the godfather of my son. So somehow I will find a way.
Fantastic. I'm glad you have the chance to get it back, because the answer to that question from my side is one that was stolen and I never saw again. So the chances of getting that one back were few and far between back then and are slim to none in the current day. It's interesting that you mentioned the Kona Hey. The only titanium bike in my collection is actually one that I'm building and customizing to eventually be the showpiece bike for the Terra One T2 tire with the cream-colored tread rubber. So it's a Diamondback DBR Axis TT that was made in the Sandvik factory that I believe was the same factory made your Hey. So
exactly. Very nice. Very nice. Curious to see that
Bryson, you want to chime in on your long lost love?
Yeah, actually, in contrast to you, Terrance, the bike that I will speak about is a bike that was stolen from me, and I recovered it. Now, there's a not so boring story, but long story short, it was a Balfa two-step, just the normal version. It was probably like a second or third year of production. And they went through a couple different variations of the swing arm, so that's how you can kind of tell what year it was. But I bought the frame only from a super sketchy guy off the Pink Bike Buy and Sell, and I rode that frame really hard, and it took me many places, and I met a lot of cool people on it. It was my first project that I really brought me into like the mountain bike world. I spoke about this before on another podcast, but Belfa two-step.
Is Belfa from Quebec?
That's
Canada?
true. Yes, it is.
Yeah. So if I had lived another 30 minutes north when I was growing up, I might have been working there and speaking a lot better French than I do today. All right, Bryson, thanks for that look into the past. Let me ask you the second closing question from the Uncommon Deeds podcast. What is the dumbest thing you've ever done on a bicycle?
Wow.
That has Bryson written all over it.
Yeah, it's pretty much anytime I go out on a bicycle, it turns out to be one of the dumbest things I've ever done. I like to get in a lot of mishaps, whether they are by my own doing or not. And the best part is when I'm like grease everywhere, completely a sweat ball, I don't know, like kind of going crazy. And I look up at whoever volunteered to go on this kamikaze mission with me, and I say to them, "Welcome to a Bryson ride."
Fantastic. Pascal, you want a piece of that, or is discretion the better part of valor?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of dumb stories. So many of them involve crashes, and maybe another throwback bike. Like we've talked about my LTS before, and one of the first times I took it out to the real mountains was after I watched some footage from the kamikaze downhill in Mammoth. And where obviously Johnny T, big idol of mine in my youth, who had this fantastic neon orange Maguras, which I also had on my bike, and of course I needed to try them out. So I took them up this Alpine Fire Road completely on my own. My parents didn't know where I was, and so I was like 15 or 16 at the time, and then just schlepped up the bike, and then it was like at the top. I had a full face helmet at the time, but that didn't do much because it was like I think one of the first Troy Lee designs, full face with the removable chin bar and stuff. And, it's like, so I'm going to be Johnny T and I'm just going to ride down this fire road like super fast. It took me like 2 turns, and then I ate so much crap down like the second turn, off the road, down the hill, tachoed the rear wheel, and I had to stop, carry the bike down for like an hour, and so that was one of the dumber things that I've done, but I'm sure there's plenty more of those.
Yeah, growing up in Vermont, we had the Mount Snow Norba Nationals. Was one of the biggest races in the U.S. calendar every year. And I remember the first time that I went to that race, I was so gung-ho, and I just built a bike that was my design. I was in university at the time, and I'd asked New England frame builder Ted Wojcik to make a bike to my design. And surprise of all surprises, even though he didn't agree with some of the theory behind my design, he made it anyway. Anyway, so I had my own bike, and I was so excited that I signed up for every possible race that I could do. And I was like, I was going to ride the bike that I designed, and I was going to ride downhill, dual slalom, cross country, the whole bit. Pre-riding the downhill there, Mount Snow is very famous for 2 things. One, super rooty, rocky through the woods, and wide open fire roads with round rocks that just roll over each other. And somehow at that point, downhill was not quite what it is today, and the tracks were not quite so aggressive. So I might have had a chance of clearing some of the wood sections, but there was no way that I was going to ride on this bike a hardtail with mostly cross country tires and Mag 20 suspension fork. There was no way that after pre-riding the course, that I was going to ride at speed on those gravel roads. So your story rings true on my side. I didn't eat it quite as hard as you did, but I definitely had some moments there.
Nice.
All right. One last question then to wrap it up. Maybe speaking a little bit more to personality as opposed to technology. And you can split this one up as you'd like, but the question is, if you have a long road trip to a cycling event, who is the one person you'd most want riding shotgun?
Bryson, you want to go first?
If I was driving to a cycling event, road trip, this has got to be a multi-talented person. I need someone who's going to be a good DJ. I need someone who's going to remind me to take a drink of water every once in a while and to relax, because sometimes the roads can get a little bit crazy. So I can't really name anyone off the top of my head, but since Pascal let me
Ride shotgun in the Lambo.
Yes. Since Pascal let me swamp for him quite a few times, he can ride shotgun with me.
Oh, that's nice. But yeah, now the true story is, of course, that the idea of starting a podcast is also born out of a number of very, very long road trips in the car, where we've had plenty of very entertaining discussions, and at some stage we both thought, it was like, hey, why don't we just record this and see what happens? And well, there we go. Here we are. We're like 20 plus episodes deep, and we're going strong, and we're having a lot of fun, and making cool stuff, and people are excited about it. We're excited about it, and I think that's the only thing we wanted to achieve with this thing. And I guess. So Bryson is a good partner for road trips and deep discussions about the relative position of your bottom bracket and the wheelbase and head tube angles and C tube angles and all that stuff. And I think we could easily kill 2 hours with that.
So long story short, we definitely entertain each other.
Exactly.
That's pretty important. Yeah, it reminds me of a friend from Vermont who I've done several road trips with, but not in a long time. And I would really like to fix that once travel becomes freer and easier and safe. You noticed that I didn't chime in with my answer about what the stupidest thing I've ever done on a bicycle was, but he was definitely there for that ride. It takes a special kind of friend to, with a ride with 3 people, host the ride, rebuild the bottom bracket of the other friend's bike before we go out on the ride, stand on his porch and say, everything you see here, we're going to ride, and then come back and pick me up with the truck after I've bonked so hard that I'm sitting in the gutter talking to squirrels. So Ian Buchanan, if you're listening to this, we need to go road tripping again very soon.
There you go. Well, the US is great for road trips, right? Because you can drive for like 4,000 kilometers nonstop.
Oh, we've done the United States, quite a bit of the United States together, so I think it's time for European vacation.
Oh, nice. All right, well, we can't not close out the Skids and Giggles podcast without asking the pièce de résistance, the real deep one, the one that we are all waiting for, and really what this show is all about. So can you please tell us what makes a great skid?
Well, one that you walk away from for sure. To bring it back, as a maker of tires, modern tires for vintage bikes, the perfect skid has got to be the one that you have after a great ride, hopefully with friends, located just in front of your garage or the vehicle that brought you to the trailhead, in which your original 30-year-old tires very gracefully fail completely as you climb off the bike. And you and your bike are left intact, and you're ready to mount a pair of Terra One tires for your next adventure.
Oh, fantastic. What a marketing pitch. Love it. We should make a soundbite for your socials.
I worked hard on that one.
Nice. Well, Terrance, thanks again for your time and for sitting down with us. This is really, really cool. And we'll hope you had also some fun. If listeners have any questions or want to learn more about Terra One, you and what you're up to, where can they find you?
You can find it on the website, rideterra1.com, on socials, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Ride Terra One. And you'll find plenty of ways to contact me if you check those out.
Sweet.
Please.
Very nice.
Take a look and see what I'm up to.
Absolutely. We'll put all of the info and all the stuff we talked about, the tidbits, the infos, and all that sort of stuff. We put that in the show notes as well. And with that, close it out. Thank you very much for your time again, and talk to you soon.
Adios.
Thank you. Look forward to it.